And welcome to Spicer and Company. I'm Rob Schmidt filling in today for Sean Spicer on this Labor Day. Lindsay, how was your weekend?
Hey, it's good to see you, Rob. I'm Lindsay Keith. It was great, except for working on a holiday, of course. How was yours?
Not too bad. A little shorter than most, but we're here. We're going to try and make it some fun anyway.
All right. Yes, we are. Well, Rob, I will say, though, the Democrats have been pushing for mail-in voting for some time for this election. Let's take a listen to a few of those.
Mailing in an absentee ballot is one of the safest ways that we can vote this year.
Vote by mail is more democratic. It gives people more options. It removes obstacles and barriers.
Obviously, mail-in voting makes sense, right? You can buy something with a credit card over the internet. Of course, you can do mail-in voting.
All right, so they're pushing for this pretty hard, Rob, but what they're getting wrong here is that universal mail-in ballot and absentee ballots are not created equal.
That's exactly right, Lindsay, and that's exactly what the Trump campaign is fighting against. They currently have legal battles in 5 different states aimed at limiting those mail-in voting expansions. They're arguing that local election administrators have violated state law by pre-filling portions of the absentee ballots. Joining us now to discuss the legal issues surrounding mail-in voting is senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, good to see you. Thanks for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Just give me your initial take of all this. What do you think of the Trump campaign's complaints here?
They actually have the right attitude about this. The problem with, for example, pre-filling out the information on absentee ballot request forms is that makes it easier to cheat. The whole point of those forms is to provide some kind of authentication that it's the real voter requesting an absentee or mail-in ballot. And that's why they're supposed to fill in basic information like their name as it's registered, their address, etc. If all that information's already there, then somebody who lives in a house where maybe that registered voter used to live can fill out that form and send it back in and get an absentee ballot that they shouldn't be getting.
How litigious do you think this is going to get? I mean, you envision an election where nobody's happy no matter what the result is. How bad do you think this is going to play out?
Well, look, we already know it's going to be bad because there have been more lawsuits filed this year prior to the election, over 160 at last count, than I've ever seen in any election year. And I think what's going to happen is any state where the voting is close, the count is close, and large numbers of absentee ballots were rejected, as unfortunately normally happens with absentee ballots, you're going to see litigation contesting the outcome.
I was just going to say, one of the interesting things is, Han, you actually have people on the right who are pushing back at Trump's strong stance on making this a big deal. Even House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, in an interview by Axios' Alana Treen, he said this to her: "I tried to show him," referring to Trump, "you know who is most afraid of COVID? Seniors. And if they're not going to go vote, period, we're screwed." This is what he told her. Do you think that Trump is making a mistake here, and this is actually going to backfire on him by making this such a huge issue, especially for his largest voting bloc, which would be seniors who might be afraid of getting COVID?
No, actually, like I said, I think it is a very serious concern. There's 2 things to understand about this. One, do you really want to be dependent on the U.S. Postal Service to maybe deliver your ballot in time? We know that they constantly have problems with that. We've seen that in all the primaries that have occurred. And second, people right now all over the country should be demanding of their local election officials to have as many of the precincts open as possible so that they can vote safely in person. We're all going to our grocery stores and our pharmacies. If we can do that, why can't we vote in person as long as they're following the safety protocols that everybody else is recommending for in-person voting and for going to our retail establishments?
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like that we should have more precincts open than left,
Yes.
than closed. But Hans, I also want to ask you this, because Mitch McConnell has come out and said that it's okay to vote by mail, that we should trust the system. If you can go in person, you can, put it in the mail, that you should trust the system. Don't worry about it. But I also want to say, back to your point, and the Dems want to give the Postal Service $25 billion for this, $1 million rather, and Mitch McConnell says, hey, we should give them money, only to $10 million. But do you think that this is a good standpoint to say, actually, we should give the Postal Service some money to make sure that this isn't an issue come November and that they have the resources they need to handle the influx?
An influx of more money isn't going to solve the problems at the Postal Service, which suffers from bad management and a lack of reforms to make it a more efficient operation. They've had problems for years in the delivery of absentee ballots, delivering them too late, making all kinds of mistakes with them. We've seen all that occur, not just in the primaries this year, but in prior elections too. And a huge influx of money is not going to help that. The more people vote by mail, the more people are going to be disenfranchised in the election and have their ballots rejected in much greater numbers than if you vote in person.
Hans, it sounds like you're not optimistic about the way this is going to turn out here in a couple of months. You told the Daily Caller to expect chaos for the November election. Quote, rather than telling voters to vote by mail, as so many jurisdictions are mistakenly doing, and decreasing the number of polling locations, the CDC recommends increasing the number of polling locations in order to improve the ability to social distance. What are you anticipating here? What is this going to look like?
Well, it looks like we maybe just had some technical difficulties with Hans, but I do think it's going to be interesting, Rob, to see what this will look like. I know one of the issues as well has been that the people who run the polls are usually older individuals, and they might be afraid to actually go and run these locations. And so this is a challenging time of what's going to be done and what this is going to look like. It seems like both sides are trying to set up the narrative that they can point fingers and blame. And to your original point, to Hans, like, is this going to be litigious after? Are we going to see what we saw with Al Gore versus George W. Bush? Is this just going to be pandemonium after November 3rd?
Yeah, I mean, it could be really messy, and it is too bad we lost Hans because we were just getting into some good stuff. But this Hawkfish group, what they said about election night, they made that prediction that you could see when the election night comes, Donald Trump could have this huge lead, in the beginning of the night because his supporters are more likely to be voting, there at the ballot, whereas you've got the Democrats could be more likely to do, voting by mail, such as that. So it could. We can go ahead and actually take a listen to that.
We are sounding an alarm and saying that this is a very real possibility, that the data is going to show on election night an incredible victory for Donald Trump. That is likely to be what we see when every legitimate vote is tallied and we get to that final day, which will be some day after Election Day. It will, in fact, show that what happened on election night was exactly that, a mirage.
It's going to be wild, I think, unfortunately. I almost wish that you would have states setting up the expectation that we probably will not have a known winner on election night. It could be days, weeks. It's unknown at this point, clearly.
And then keep in mind the fact that, we've already had protests and rioting in this country for the last 100 days, likely to carry right into the election, maybe even ramp up going into the election as people anticipate who's going to be the next president. If people don't get an answer, or if they're not getting the answer they want, I have no idea how that's going to exacerbate the current situation in this country. Yeah. It could be really messy in November around. Coming up next here, a former Marine will weigh in on that now infamous article from The Atlantic that claims that the president called military members losers and suckers. And then we're going to discuss the recent violent protests from around the country, like we were just talking about with Jim Carafano from the Heritage Foundation. Later on, we're going to talk to author Clay Clark about some controversial data surrounding COVID-19 deaths. All that and more ahead here on Spicer&Co.